Hey guys, and welcome to another section of chapter 23. And so now we're going to be talking about viral diseases of the digestive system. And so here too, we can see different things like gastroenteritis. And it's really kind of annoying because honestly, the symptoms between bacterial gastroenteritis and viral gastroenteritis, as you may have imagined, are pretty much very similar. A lot of times, though, the viral gastroenteritis are going to be resolved by themselves eventually, even though they can be kind of horrible, but they do resolve by themselves eventually. And then in addition, so like some of them are, you might see them as mild, but remember with viral, like with digestive system, we're also going to be talking about things like hepatitis, and so that's basically liver inflammation, and so there are some viral diseases that are actually kind of bad. So first off is we're starting with the mouth, right? And of course we're going to look at mumps. So mumps are basically when you have your salivary glands are infected, and they are just like huge. They completely swollen salivary glands. And these are located on each side of the face. Mumps nowadays is not very common because of the success of immunization in the MMR vaccine. However, a lot of times, like this vaccine is being used less and less, or being like, used less and less. And so this virus as well, this particular infection right here, could also be on the rise. It's caused by the mumps virus, which is basically a virus that has humans as their host. It's spread person to person. You see this a lot with children, especially like when you think about daycare, they're like always like crowded with each other. They can also be carried by fomites carrying contaminated saliva. So again, children licking stuff. Okay. Some patients can suffer inflammations of the testes, which can lead to sterility. It can go and spread to the meninges or the pancreas. In fact, it spreads basically to your blood. And so the virus goes to your blood, and so therefore it can spread to other areas. In addition, and this is rare, but it can happen, mumps can lead to deafness as well sometimes. Yeah. So there's no specific treatment for the mumps. You just have supportive care and pain medication. But you do have like vaccines to prevent it. And infected individuals develop lifelong immunity. Okay, before we go into, I think I forgot one. So before we go into gastroenteritis, which is like further down in the GI, in the digestive system, we're still on the mouth, and I didn't mention this one, but of course there's also oral herpes, right? So caused by the human herpes virus 1 and human herpes virus 2. Most of the cases of oral herpes are going to be caused by human herpes virus 1. Again, HHV2 is usually seen from below the waist, but it can be, both can happen, both can cause it, so they can be interchangeable. And basically with herpes on the mouth, you just get your cold sores, right? And so you get these, I'm flipping through the book because I'm pretty sure that they talk about oral herpes, because that is just like, the mouth. Let's flip through the book and see. But anyways, you get these cold sores slash like fever blisters that are like clear liquids, they're clear liquid, and then they can burst and form crusts. And these crusts can be basically entrances for secondary pathogens to come in and infect you even more after that. But generally, they're not really like terrible. Sometimes they can be accompanied by fever, malaise, etc. But every time you have an onset of these cold sores coming back, because they can come back. They can even come back like after like 2 weeks, every 2 weeks. Thankfully, though, isn't always the case. Right? Usually they come back when something spurs it on, like stressors, for example. So the cold, like usually the more they come back, the subsequent kind of bouts of herpes, oral herpes, get milder and milder and milder. So it's never as bad as the first one. So let's see. Yeah, I don't know where it can go. It can, I'm sorry, I don't have this, but anyways, it can spread. It can spread to the pharynx, so you get herpes pharyngitis, and even the esophagus, so herpes esophagitis or esophagitis. And there you'd have like fever and really bad, like a hard time swallowing. That one's kind of bad. And if you guys remember, the herpes virus is actually latent in your nerve ganglia as it enters like through the sensory nerves and stuff, and so it can become active again. That's why I was talking about it coming up like every 2 weeks, but usually that's not the case. And then, so when you do have cold sores that come up, they can go away between 1 or 2 weeks time. And during that whole time, you are shedding viruses. And so one means of prevention is just making sure that you do not come into contact with anyone that does have cold sores, right? And that you pay attention to what you like, the drinks, etc., that kind of stuff. So I'm sure that your book talks about it. I can't find it right now. I think I'm in the wrong chapter, but just the herpes virus we already kind of mentioned it already, so it shouldn't be too new to you guys. Okay, let's move on to viral gastroenteritis. So here, the signs and symptoms are pretty much like those of bacterial gastroenteritis. So you have abdominal pain, cramping, nausea, vomiting, sometimes even like diarrhea. It can get to like severe dysentery and like bloody diarrhea and everything. And that can be really, that could be fatal. But usually it's doesn't usually go that way. It's usually less severe than any kind of bacterial form of the disease. One of the main complications that we get with viral gastroenteritis is dehydration. And like I said, since it's a lot milder than bacteria, in fact, these symptoms actually resolve themselves within 12 to 60 hours. So it's just like you have that horrible time period where you're like getting, you have these nasty symptoms, but they do resolve themselves. So common causes of viral gastroenteritis are calcicivirus, the norovirus, astrovirus, and the rotavirus. The ones that are done the most common ones are going to be like your norovirus and your rotavirus. So the viruses enter the digestive tract and contaminate food or water. So a lot of like even fecal contamination or something like that. And they infect the cells lining the intestinal tract where they undergo lytic replication. So technically your epithelial cells in your intestinal tract do die, but it is self-limiting. And then once once you have resolved the issue, your epithelial cells grow back. The norovirus, like I said, is one of the main ones. It causes about 90% of viral gastroenteritis cases. And then the rotavirus, which is the other main one that I mentioned, that usually happens in like newborns or babies or like, little children. So diagnosis is your typical like symptoms, right? Those horrible, nasty symptoms. But then in addition, you want to do an X-tag, GPP, like nucleic acid test to see exactly that it is a virus, and then you can even see what specific strain of virus it is. So there's no actual antiviral drugs that one uses to get rid of viral gastroenteritis. It would basically be treatment is more of just like supportive treatment and just making sure that the person is hydrated, if you get your fluid, electrolytes, etc. Because you're losing water, right, both through the mouth and through the backside. So you want to, which is the case with gastroenteritis, you just want to replenish those electrolytes and the loss of water. You do not want to, just like with bacterial gastroenteritis, you do not want to give an antidiuretic because basically that would clog everything up. It would force the virus to stay within the system, and we want the virus to be washed out. Prevention involves frequent hand washing, good personal hygiene, safe food handling procedure, disinfection, and water purification. And then, in terms of vaccines, there is a vaccine against the one that is caused or that happens more in kids, just because it's better that way. So there is the oral vaccine against the rotavirus. And you can see where there's more prevalence. And as you may be able to tell, the deaths that come about from viral gastroenteritis are basically in places that lack the most, they lack, the best hospital practices, if that makes sense. So a lot of third world countries where people either cannot go to the hospital or the hospital can't really take care of them. So this is where most deaths occur, just because in any kind of gastroenteritis, it can be fatal as long as you are literally dehydrating yourself pretty much. So if you don't get treatment in that, if you don't get that proper rehydration, it can be bad. Hepatitis, there we go. So hepatitis is the inflammation of the liver. This inflammation can be not only produced by microbial infection, it can also come about through genetics and autoimmune disorder, right? Alcohol or abuse of alcohol or drug. or abuse of drugs. So there's other reasons why hepatitis can come about, but microbial infection is one of them, and it's basically due to a whole host of viruses that are basically hepatitis viruses, and we name them, like we have like hepatitis A, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, etc. So the signs and symptoms, you have jaundice. So if you remember the liver, right, is there to recycle toxins, recycle like any kind of hemoglobin and everything. And so if the liver's function is impaired, bilirubin is going to increase in amount, right? So because like the hemoglobin isn't recycled properly. And so because of that, you turn yellow, and that's what jaundice is. So you have like sunken eyes and a yellowish complexion. You definitely have abdominal pain and distension, dark urine, which is one way that you can really, like, a person can like notice themselves that they're not feeling good, because a lot of times with hepatitis, you don't really know the symptoms, like you don't really feel anything bad happening for a while, and then later it's like it's horrible. So the dark urine can be kind of an indication. You have light color stools, loss of appetite, nausea, vomiting, fatigue, fever, and weight loss. So different, you may confuse it with, say, something like gastroenteritis, but compared to gastroenteritis, we do have sweating, we do have weight loss, loss of appetite, fever, fatigue, those kind of things. There's also coma because of the accumulation of waste in the blood, because remember, if your liver is not working, then your waste and nothing gets recycled within your blood or within your system. So any kind of accumulation of these kind of toxins or whatever that you put in your body is can cause coma, like can make you go into a coma. Liver failure can occur with chronic infections. And like I said before, signs and symptoms may occur until years after the initial infection. So, okay, so what causes the hepatitis? So like I said, lots of different strains of hepatovirus, like hepatitis viruses. So we have hepatitis A, we have hepatitis B, we have hepatitis C, hepatitis delta, which is hepatitis D, or hepatitis E. And they're all, they all have something. So hepatitis, for example, hepatitis A and E are usually transmitted through fecal oral contamination. With these particular viruses, like this type of hepatitis can be resolved by your body alone. So your immune response can end up resolving it, while it's a different case for HBV or HCV. And we'll talk a little bit about HDV and how it's weird. In fact, HDV can't live. It can't actually, you probably haven't even heard, maybe, I don't know, of hepatitis delta very often, or hepatitis D. And that's because hepatitis D, you can't actually get it by itself. It's always in conjugation with hep B. So hold on, we'll get to it. Okay, so sorry, I don't know what the heck I'm doing. Okay, so hep A, this is infectious hepatitis, hep A and E. Okay, I already talked about, they're spread via fecal oral route, and they're usually cleared by the immune system. Okay, right. Other viruses can be spread sexually via contaminated needles, it typically remains and it doesn't go away. And so in this case, it results in chronic infections. So hep B is also known as serum hepatitis, because it basically gets released in your blood as well, because it replicates in the liver cells, and instead of lysing the liver cells after it replicates, it actually gets excreted via exocytosis, so it's found within your blood, and so then it can go ahead and infect other cells. So the infected cells that you do have with hep B are going to be a continual source of more hep B viruses. Most body secretions carry the infectious virus. That's why it can be caught on even like through sexual transmission, through sexual means, or like, needles, or like whatever. It basically, it goes everywhere. It can also cause liver cancer. There's a huge association and correlation in which HBV that can cause liver cancer. You can also have co-infection, and this is what I was talking about before with the Delta virus. HBV, you can have co-infection with the herpes delta, I always say that, I'm sorry, hepatitis, I always say that, the hepatitis delta virus, or HDV. And basically what that means is with HDV, it's kind of like like a satellite virus, meaning it's not a full-blown virus. It's even less than that. It actually doesn't have a capsid. It doesn't have, or it does have a capsid, but it doesn't have the genes to encode for its capsid. So remember that coating around the viral genome. So in order for it to actually make that capsid, it actually relies on Hep B and its capsid genes to make it. So hepatitis D can never infect you by itself, because if it does, there's just no way for it to make a capsid, and so it's always going to be vulnerable to the environment. It's just going to die. But if you have hepatitis B in you and you get hepatitis D, then hepatitis D can basically kind of smooch off of hepatitis B capsid genes and and capsid proteins and make a capsid for itself. So, or force you actually to make a capsid for itself. So it utilizes basically herpes. I'm so sorry, I keep making this mistake. I actually like even think about it and then I'm like, oh, herpes. Sorry, hepatitis. You get like the hepatitis B's capsomeres, which will make the capsid for the hepatitis D. So, and when you do have HPV and HDV, it's known as a super infection. Like it's a really bad, like it's one of like the worst kind of like hepatitis infection you can have. Hepatitis C, this is known as also known as chronic hepatitis. So it's annoying because there's just so many strains involved in it. There's so many strains that because it just has a very high mutability factor, and because of its many strains, I believe we don't actually have a vaccine for it. So we don't have a vaccine for it yet. So like it's just because it's always changing essentially. Yeah. Even though the good news is we do have some antivirals, I don't remember the name specifically, but some antiviral drugs that do work against Hep C. So yeah. So it evolves, and because of that, it's hard to make a vaccine. Okay, so diagnosis is based on the signs and symptoms, serological test, or even liver biopsy. You can even see like microscopic things of it. The treatment involves rest and reducing inflammation. The immunoglobulin, so antibodies are given immediately after exposures, and this seems to offer some protection. So there's usually no drugs, no antiviral drugs that work, but like I said, with Hep C and even Hep B, you do have some sort of like antiviral drugs that can help. But in terms of A, D, or E, there's really nothing that can nothing to do. Thankfully, hepatitis A and hepatitis E are both types of hepatitis that just get resolved by your own immune system. So that's really good. Prevention, it generally involves avoiding exposure. So wash hands, avoid undercooked food, and just avoid sharing needles. Screening of blood products is actually the screening of blood products. It used to be a really big deal because like the blood that people were giving, it wasn't being screened for any of these kinds of infections, like infectious microbes. And so now that we do that, it's really, it's made things a lot easier and better, like decrease the amount of hepatitis that we have. But hepatitis is still like a big thing. Like I think for Hep C, I think there's like more than 100 million, I'd say like around 150 million people worldwide, probably even more than that, 150 million, 200 million people worldwide that are infected with Hep C. So, and a substantial amount of them are still found also in the US. So it's not something that like Western worlds are deprived of, like they still have it too. So yeah, abstinence also can help because again, like for especially things like Hep C or B, it can be Hep C or B. It can be passed on to like all the rest of the body fluids, and so they can be passed on sexually. So condoms or abstinence will help reduce. Abstinence will help you clear out, and then condoms can help you reduce the risk. Vaccines are available for hepatitis A and B, but they're not available for Hep C or E. So yeah, remember Hep C, the reason why we don't have it there is just because it's evolved so continuously. It's really crazy. And like it's interesting because like each of these strains, each of these viruses does have, something particular of its own. For example, HBV, Hep B has kind of like its own decoy system. It makes these dare particles, which like confuse your your own immune system, and the antibodies go against those, and they're like these particles are just empty. They're not the virus itself, and so it kind of acts as a decoy to keep your antibodies and everything and your complements in kind of busy while Hep B is doing its own thing. So each one has its own little specific thing. Like Hep D, you have to have it needs to infect with Hep B. So each one is very specific, but they all result in the same kind of signs and symptoms. Okay, and here you can see a little bit more of a comparison. Oh, here you see the Dane particle right there. That's what I was talking about with, what was it? With Hep B. Like these Dane particles, like the virus releases, and your antibodies, your immune response goes against the Dane particle, but it doesn't actually harm, like, which is just a decoy, right? It's just outer coat of surface antigens in cross section. Sorry, outer coat of surface antigens, and that's it. And so it's just a decoy, and it doesn't actually harm the virus itself. Okay, so that is it for viruses, and I will see you guys in the next video, which is all about protozoans, and I think I'm going to sneak in there helminths as well, maybe, or maybe I'll just do another video for that one. All right, guys, I shall see you guys soon.